door had been sealed for 23 years. No one dared open it. No one even remembered why it was locked in the first place. But when the townspeople of Tennessee finally broke the iron chains in the winter of 1872, they did not find dust, bones, or silence waiting inside. They found a child, alive, a child who had never seen sunlight, a child who had never spoken a word, a child who had survived alone in a room where no food was ever delivered, and no sound had ever escaped. But the most terrifying mystery was not how the child survived. It was why the room had been sealed, and what terrible secret the walls had been hiding. And by the time you discover the truth behind that door, you may question everything you believe about fear, survival, and the strength of the human soul. Stay until the end, because this child's story did not end when the door opened. It began. The mystery behind the child's survival exposes a powerful truth about fear, abandonment, and the unbreakable will to live. Winter arrived early in Tennessee in the year 1872, swallowing the small mountain town of Briar Glen beneath a heavy silence that seemed to suffocate sound itself. Snow fell not in gentle flakes but in thick, relentless sheets, covering the narrow dirt roads, burying the fences, and turning the hills into pale ghosts beneath a dim and colorless sky. The wind moved through the trees with a hollow whistle, like a distant warning no one wished to understand. Life in Briar Glen had always been simple. The townspeople woke with the sunrise, worked until their hands ached, and returned home before darkness settled across the valley. They were people of routine, of faith, and of quiet understanding. But there was one place in their town where routine did not exist. At the far edge of Briar Glen, where the forest thickened and the road narrowed into a forgotten path, stood a house no one dared approach. It was known only as the Hollow House. The structure leaned slightly to one side, as though exhausted from standing too long. Its wood had rotted into a deep gray, its windows were clouded with dust, and its roof sagged under years of neglect. No smoke had risen from its chimney for decades, yet something about it suggested it was not entirely abandoned. It watched, even on the coldest mornings, when frost covered the earth like glass. The house seemed untouched by the passing seasons. Snow never fully settled on its porch. Its windows reflected no light, and those who passed too close often spoke of a strange sensation, the feeling of being observed. Children grew up hearing stories about it. Mothers warned them never to wander near its yard. Hunters refused to track animals across its land. Even the town's dogs, usually fearless creatures, would whimper and pull away if led toward the property. But what frightened the people most was not the house itself. It was the door. Beneath the structure, partially hidden by collapsed boards and tangled weeds, was a lower entrance secured by thick iron chains. The door had been reinforced with heavy metal bolts, and strange symbols, faded by time, had been scratched across its surface. No one remembered who carved them. No one remembered when the door had first been sealed. They only remembered why. Or at least, they believed they did. Years earlier, before the house became a place of fear, it had belonged to a widow named Margaret Hale. She had arrived in Briar Glen with her young son shortly after the death of her husband. At first, the townspeople welcomed her warmly. She was polite, soft-spoken, and kept to herself, raising her small boy in quiet isolation. The child's name was Samuel. He was rarely seen beyond the yard, a delicate boy with pale skin and wide, curious eyes. Those who glimpsed him described a gentle child who clung closely to his mother, always watching the world with an unsettling stillness. For a time, nothing seemed unusual. Then the sounds began. It started with scratching beneath the floors at night. Faint, rhythmic movements that echoed through the ground like something restless searching for escape. Margaret told neighbors she heard whispers in the walls, soft voices calling from empty spaces. She claimed shadows moved where no light existed. At first the townspeople dismissed her fears as grief. Widowhood could fracture the strongest minds, and many believed she simply needed time. But her behavior worsened. She began boarding her windows. She refused visitors. She spoke of unseen dangers lurking beyond the trees. She insisted something was watching her family, waiting for the moment to strike. Then came the night no one forgot. A terrible storm raged across Briar Glen. Thunder shook the valley, lightning split the sky, and from within the Hale house came screams, desperate, pleading cries that cut through the roaring wind. The next morning, Margaret Hale was gone. Her son was nowhere to be found. The townspeople searched the house from top to bottom. Furniture remained untouched. Meals sat unfinished on the table, yet there was no sign of struggle, no evidence of escape, and no trace of the child. But beneath the house, they discovered the door. It had been sealed from the outside. Fear overtook reason. No one dared open it. Some believed the child was already dead within. Others whispered that whatever had driven Margaret to madness might still dwell beyond that barrier. So the townspeople did the only thing they believed would protect them. They sealed it further. Chains were added, bolts reinforced, prayers were spoken, and slowly the house was abandoned entirely, left to rot alongside the unanswered questions buried beneath it. Years passed. Children grew into adults who repeated the story as unquestionable truth. The hollow house became more legend than reality, a warning rather than a place. The memory of Margaret and her son faded into uneasy folklore, spoken only in hushed tones during long winter nights. Fear became tradition. Tradition became silence. 23 years later, the winter of 1872 brought a storm unlike any before it. The sky darkened for days, and the wind screamed across the mountains with unnatural force. Trees were torn from their roots, barns collapsed, and homes trembled beneath the relentless fury. Snow buried entire roads, isolating the town from the outside world, and at the edge of Briar Glen, the hollow house began to break. Its weakened structure could not withstand the storm's violence. One night, a thunderous crash echoed through the valley as part of the lower wall collapsed, exposing the long, sealed entrance beneath the house. At dawn, the townspeople gathered at a distance, staring in fearful silence. The door was visible once more. Its chains, once hidden by years of decay, now hung loose against the shattered frame. The storm had uncovered what time had tried to erase. For hours, no one moved. The elders warned against disturbing it. They spoke of curses, of restless spirits, of dangers best left untouched. But younger men, driven by curiosity stronger than fear, argued that whatever lay beyond could no longer threaten them. Perhaps, they said, the truth deserved to be known. Reluctantly, a group approached. Their boots crunched against the frozen ground as they stepped toward the house. Each movement carried the weight of generations of fear. The air itself seemed heavier near the structure, cold and unnaturally still. They stood before the door. The iron chains were thick with rust, their links fused by time. The strange markings etched across the surface appeared almost deliberate, their meaning long forgotten, yet somehow unsettling to behold. Lanterns were lit. Axes were raised. The first strike against the chain rang out sharply, echoing across the valley like a warning. Some claimed the sound seemed to answer itself, repeating faintly from within the darkness beyond the door. Again the axe fell, and again each blow weakened the metal until, with a final shattering crack, the chains snapped and fell heavily to the ground. Silence followed. No one dared breathe. Slowly, trembling hands pushed against the door. The hinges groaned in protest, releasing a long, aching sound as the barrier moved for the first time in decades. A wave of air rushed outward, damp, stale, and suffocating. It carried the scent of earth, decay, and something else as something strangely human. The lantern light stretched into the darkness, revealing a narrow stone chamber swallowed by shadow. The walls were damp with moisture, the floor layered with dust undisturbed for years. At first, they saw nothing. Then one of the men whispered. Something had moved. In the farthest corner of the chamber, a small shape crouched against the wall, barely visible in the dim light. It did not flee. It did not cry out. It simply watched. As the lanterns drew closer, the shape revealed itself, a child. He was thin beyond comprehension, his limbs fragile and trembling, his skin pale as bone. Tangled hair fell across his face, and his enormous eyes reflected the lantern light with an animal-like sensitivity. He shielded himself from the brightness, recoiling as though the light itself caused pain. No chains bound him, no restraints held him. He had simply been there, waiting, alive. Shock rippled through the men. Some staggered backward in fear, others crossed themselves, whispering prayers beneath shaking breaths. The impossible stood before them, a child who had survived alone in a sealed room for more than 2 decades. No food, no caretaker, no explanation, yet he breathed. When one man stepped closer, the child let out a sound unlike anything they had ever heard, a raw, piercing cry that seemed to carry years of silence within it. It was not merely fear, but the voice of someone who had forgotten what sound was. The cry echoed from the stone walls, filling the chamber with unbearable sorrow. Carefully, gently, they lifted him from the ground. His body weighed almost nothing, light as if carved from fragile glass. He trembled violently at their touch, yet he did not resist. As they carried him into the open air, something extraordinary happened. Sunlight touched his face for the first time. The child screamed. He buried his face in his hands, his body shaking in terror as though the brightness burned him. The world beyond the darkness was too vast, too overwhelming, too alive. The townspeople stood frozen, witnessing a moment no human should ever experience, the first encounter with light after a lifetime in shadow. Someone whispered a name, Samuel, the child Margaret Hale had lost, the boy who had vanished 23 years earlier. He had never left. As they carried him away from the hollow house, no one spoke. The weight of what they had discovered settled heavily upon them. The door they had feared for decades had not concealed a monster or curse. It had concealed a life. And as the wind swept across the valley, the broken door creaked slowly in the cold air, standing open for the first time, no longer a barrier of fear, but a silent witness to a mystery that had only just begun. For the child who survived the sealed room had brought with him questions that would haunt Briar Glen forever. How had he lived? Who had sustained him, and what terrible truth had been buried alongside him in the darkness for all those years? The storm had opened the door, but it had also awakened something far deeper, a story of abandonment, survival, and a strength no one yet understood. And in the quiet aftermath, as snow continued to fall over the valley, the people of Briar Glen realized with growing unease that the true mystery was not what they had found inside the room. It was what had allowed the child to remain alive within it. The door no one touched had finally been opened, but its secrets had only begun to speak. The child who emerged from the darkness of the hollow house did not enter the world as others did. He arrived trembling, blinded by brightness, terrified by sound, and overwhelmed by the vastness of a reality he had never known. To the people of Briar Glen, the boy's survival was a miracle. To the boy himself, the world was a nightmare. They carried Samuel carefully through the snowy streets toward the home of Dr. Elias Warren, the town's physician and the only man believed capable of helping him. The townspeople followed at a distance, whispering among themselves, glancing at the fragile figure wrapped in blankets, as though he might vanish if stared at too closely. Samuel's eyes remained tightly shut against the daylight. Even the faint glow of the winter sun caused him unbearable distress. His thin fingers clutched the blanket with desperate force, and every unfamiliar sound, footsteps, voices, the howl of the wind, made his body jolt with fear. He had not entered their world. Their world had invaded his. Inside Dr. Warren's home, the windows were covered with heavy curtains to soften the light. The room was warmed by a gentle fire, and the air carried the scent of herbs and medicine. The doctor placed Samuel carefully upon a bed, speaking in slow, soothing tones. The child did not understand the words. He only understood that he was no longer alone in the darkness he had known his entire life. Dr. Warren examined him with quiet astonishment. The boy's body was severely malnourished, his bones fragile beneath paper, thin skin. His muscles showed little development, and his movements were cautious and unfamiliar, like those of a creature learning to exist in physical space. Yet his heart was strong, his breathing steady, his pulse resilient. It defied all understanding. No human could survive decades without nourishment or care. And yet Samuel lived, his fragile body clinging stubbornly to life. When offered food, Samuel reacted not with hunger, but confusion. He stared at the bread placed before him as though it were an object of mystery. Slowly, cautiously, he touched it, sniffed it, and then hid it beneath the blankets rather than eating it. Later, when left alone, he consumed small pieces in secret, chewing slowly, instinctively rationing each bite. It was the behavior of someone who had learned survival, not through teaching, but through necessity. Days passed before he made any sound beyond frightened cries. He communicated through gestures, pointing, recoiling, curling into himself when afraid. Language was unknown to him. Words carried no meaning, but fear, loneliness, and instinct, those he understood completely. He refused open spaces. When placed in larger rooms, Samuel pressed himself against walls, searching for corners where he could feel enclosed. He preferred darkness, often retreating beneath tables or into narrow spaces where shadows surrounded him. At night, he did not sleep in the bed provided. Instead, he curled tightly within a wooden storage chest Dr. Warren had left open nearby, finding comfort only when confined. The world, with its endless sky and vast distances, terrified him. Darkness was safety. Enclosure was protection. Silence was peace. The townspeople visited often, curious to witness the child whose existence challenged reason itself. They watched from doorways as he moved cautiously through the doctor's home, observing everything with heightened awareness. His senses were extraordinary. He reacted to sounds too faint for others to notice. The creak of a floorboard in a distant room caused him to freeze instantly. The flicker of candlelight drew his attention with intense focus. His eyes adjusted to darkness with unnatural speed, navigating dim spaces with ease, while bright light overwhelmed him. It was as if years without sight had sharpened his other senses beyond ordinary limits. But more troubling were his habits. Samuel constantly listened, even in stillness, his head tilted slightly, as though he were waiting for something or someone. His gaze often drifted toward walls or empty spaces, watching with quiet intensity. One evening, Dr. Warren observed him pressing his ear against the wooden boards of the room, his expression filled with expectation. When nothing responded, Samuel withdrew slowly, his face clouded with confusion. It was not the behavior of a child simply adapting to a new environment. It was the behavior of someone who believed something should answer. Weeks passed before Samuel spoke his first word. The moment came unexpectedly. Dr. Warren had been gently attempting to teach him language, repeating simple sounds, pointing to objects, encouraging imitation. For days Samuel showed little understanding. Then one night, as snow fell quietly outside and the fire burned low, Samuel stirred from sleep and whispered a single word, "Mother." His voice was fragile and unused, rough with disuse, yet the word emerged clearly. Dr. Warren knelt beside him, asking softly, "Your mother?" Samuel stared ahead, eyes unfocused, as though searching distant memories buried beneath years of silence. But no explanation followed. The word held meaning, yet the memory behind it remained unreachable. It was a fragment of a life lost. From that night onward, Samuel spoke rarely, but he began to learn. Words formed slowly, painfully, like light breaking through a long darkness. Yet language revealed something deeply unsettling. Through gestures, broken phrases, and hesitant drawings, Samuel began describing his time within the sealed room. He had not believed himself alone. Using charcoal provided by the doctor, Samuel sketched the chamber where he had lived, the stone walls, the narrow space, the small wooden hatch above. His drawings were simple yet precise, filled with careful detail. But beside the room, he always drew another shape, a tall, shadow-like figure. He called it the listener. According to Samuel's fragmented descriptions, the presence lived within the walls. It did not speak, yet it responded. When he cried, scratching sounds answered him. When he was thirsty, he felt compelled to search specific stones where moisture gathered. When fear overwhelmed him, the presence remained near, silent yet comforting. To Samuel, it had been companionship. To the townspeople, it was terror. Rumors spread quickly through Briar Glen. Some believed the house had been haunted. Others whispered of spirits or dark forces that fed upon the child's suffering. But Dr. Warren rejected such explanations. He saw something far more profound, the extraordinary power of the human mind. Samuel's isolation had been absolute. Deprived of companionship, deprived of language, deprived even of light, his mind had created connection where none existed. The listener was not a supernatural being. It was the echo of a child's desperate need not to be alone. Loneliness had shaped itself into presence. Fear had become comfort. The will to survive had created its own guardian. Yet even as Samuel adjusted slowly to life among others, the marks of his past remained deeply embedded within him. He hoarded food obsessively, hiding pieces beneath furniture, within walls, beneath floorboards. If these hidden supplies were removed, he reacted with intense panic, trembling violently until they were returned. Water fascinated him. He collected it in small containers, studying its movement, touching its surface with reverence. It had once been his most precious resource. And darkness, he still sought darkness above all else. One afternoon, a curtain was accidentally drawn open, flooding the room with sudden sunlight. Samuel let out a piercing scream, collapsing to the floor, shielding his face. The brightness overwhelmed his senses, causing physical pain. The incident revealed the depth of his trauma. For 23 years, his world had contained no light. Darkness had not been absence. It had been existence itself. To force him into brightness was to erase the only reality he had known. Gradually, Dr. Warren introduced light in gentle stages, a candle, then a lantern, then the faint glow of dawn filtered through cloth. Each step brought discomfort, but also progress. Samuel's eyes slowly adapted, though he never fully lost his sensitivity. But more difficult than teaching him to see was teaching him to trust. Human touch terrified him. Sudden movement caused him to recoil. Loud voices sent him into trembling silence. He had survived without human presence. Now he had to learn humanity itself. Months passed before he accepted a simple gesture. Dr. Warren's hand resting gently upon his shoulder. The contact caused fear at first, then uncertainty, and finally a fragile sense of safety. It was the first step toward connection. As Samuel's understanding grew, the mystery surrounding his survival deepened. His body bore no signs of complete starvation. Though weakened, he had somehow sustained life far beyond what science deemed possible. Dr. Warren studied the chamber where Samuel had lived, searching for answers. Moisture seeped through the stone walls, providing minimal hydration. Insects and small organisms may have served as occasional nourishment. Yet such resources could not fully explain his survival. The truth remained elusive. Samuel had endured conditions meant to destroy life, and yet he had lived, not merely lived, endured. One evening, while sitting beside the fire, Samuel spoke more clearly than ever before. "I waited," he said quietly. Dr. Warren asked gently, "For what?" Samuel stared into the flames, his voice steady. "For morning." The words revealed the essence of his survival. Hope, fragile, persistent, unyielding. Each day within the sealed room, he had chosen to continue. Each moment of darkness had been endured with the belief that something beyond it might exist. His survival was not a miracle of circumstance. It was a miracle of will. The town slowly began to see Samuel not as a symbol of horror, but as a testament to human resilience. Fear gave way to compassion. The child once hidden in darkness became a reminder of strength beyond understanding. Yet one question remained unanswered. If the door had been sealed from the outside, who had placed him there? The answer lay buried in the past, in the tragic story of Margaret Hale, a mother driven by fear beyond reason. And as Samuel learned language, memory, and the fragile bonds of human connection, the truth of his abandonment slowly moved toward revelation. The child, who had feared the light, was beginning to understand the world beyond darkness. But the greatest challenge still awaited him. to face the truth of why he had been left alone, and to decide whether a heart shaped by silence could ever learn forgiveness. The mystery of Samuel's survival stirred something restless within the town of Briar Glen. What had begun as fear slowly transformed into a quiet determination to uncover the truth. For many, the child's existence demanded answers, not only about how he had lived, but why he had been forced into such darkness in the first place. The sealed room had hidden more than a child. It had hidden a past, and as Samuel slowly learned to speak, to trust, and to exist among others, the people of Briar Glen began searching for the story buried beneath the hollow house. The first clues came from forgotten records, brittle papers preserved in the town's small church archives, journals left by travelers, and faded letters exchanged between neighboring settlements decades earlier. The documents spoke of Margaret Hale, not simply as a grieving widow, but as a woman slowly consumed by overwhelming fear. Her husband's death had not merely saddened her, it had shattered her. He had died suddenly, leaving her alone in a world she no longer trusted. Those who knew her described a transformation, a once gentle woman becoming withdrawn, suspicious, and haunted by unseen threats. She spoke often of danger. She believed something followed her family. At first, the townspeople had offered comfort. They visited her home, brought food, and attempted to ease her troubled mind. But Margaret grew increasingly distant. She refused visitors, locked her doors, and claimed that strangers outside the windows were watching her child. Her fear deepened into obsession. She began speaking of protecting Samuel from a world she believed was corrupted, a place filled with invisible forces that sought to steal him away. She described voices in the night, shadows that moved without form, and an overwhelming certainty that only isolation could keep her son safe. To Margaret, the world itself had become the enemy, and in her desperate mind, protection required sacrifice. According to the records, Margaret had secretly constructed a hidden chamber beneath her home. She worked in silence, hiring no builders, using crude tools, shaping the space herself. The room was small, enclosed, and designed to be inaccessible from within. A place of safety, or a prison. Her final days in Briar Glen revealed the depth of her despair. Neighbors reported hearing her speaking frantically to someone who was not there. She insisted danger approached from every direction. She spoke of a coming moment when she would be forced to make a terrible choice. Then came the storm. The same night Margaret vanished. The truth, slowly pieced together from scattered evidence, was both heartbreaking and terrifying. Margaret Hale had sealed her son inside the hidden chamber, believing she was saving him. She had convinced herself that the world beyond those walls would destroy him, and that only complete isolation could ensure his survival. In her fractured mind, darkness was protection, silence was safety, and separation was love. But once the door was sealed, something within her mind finally broke. She fled into the storm, disappearing into the wilderness, leaving her child behind. No record ever revealed what became of her. She simply vanished, a mother consumed by fear, abandoning the very life she sought to protect. When Dr. Warren shared this truth with Samuel years later, the revelation did not come suddenly. It unfolded gradually, gently, as Samuel's understanding of language and memory strengthened. By then, Samuel was no longer the terrified child who recoiled from light. He had grown stronger, healthier, and more aware of the world around him. Though his movements remained cautious, and his eyes still preferred shadow over brightness, he had learned to walk freely, to speak clearly, and to form fragile bonds with those who cared for him. But some parts of him remained unchanged. He still listened to silence. He still searched for corners when afraid. And sometimes, in moments of deep reflection, he still spoke of the listener, the presence that had once kept him company in the darkness. One evening, as the sun set beyond the mountains and shadows filled the room, Dr. Warren sat beside Samuel and told him the truth of his mother. He spoke carefully, choosing each word with compassion. "Your mother believed she was protecting you," he said gently. "She was afraid of the world. She thought hiding you would keep you safe. Samuel listened in silence. He did not interrupt. He did not react. His eyes remained fixed upon the fading light beyond the window, watching the slow arrival of darkness as he had done so many times before. After a long moment he asked quietly, "She wanted me safe?" Dr. Warren nodded. "Yes." Samuel's expression did not reveal anger or sorrow. Instead, a strange calm settled over him, the quiet acceptance of someone who had known loneliness too long to resist truth. For years, he had believed himself abandoned without reason. Now he understood the reason had been fear, a tragic, broken form of love. That night, Samuel withdrew into the small enclosed space he still preferred for rest. But for the first time since his rescue, he did not listen for scratching in the walls. He did not search for the listener. He simply lay in silence. Something within him had changed. In the days that followed, Samuel spoke little, but his actions revealed deep reflection. He spent hours observing the world beyond the doctor's home, the movement of clouds, the rustling of leaves, the distant laughter of children in the streets. He was learning something he had never known: freedom, and with freedom came understanding. The world his mother had feared was not filled with unseen horrors. It was filled with life, beauty, and connection. It was imperfect, often painful, yet endlessly vast and alive. Her fear had imprisoned him, but her intention had been protection. The realization could have filled him with bitterness. Instead, it awakened compassion. One morning, as spring sunlight filtered gently through the curtains, Samuel spoke words that would forever shape his future. "She was alone," he said quietly. Dr. Warren looked at him with curiosity. "My mother," Samuel continued. "She was afraid, alone like me." It was a moment of profound empathy. A child who had endured unimaginable isolation, choosing to understand the suffering of the one who had caused it. Samuel did not choose hatred. He chose forgiveness. As years passed, Samuel's story spread beyond Briar Glen, reaching neighboring towns and distant cities. People came to witness the boy who had survived the sealed room, not as a spectacle, but as a symbol of human resilience. Scholars studied his adaptation. Physicians marveled at his survival. Clergymen spoke of his endurance as evidence of spiritual strength. But Samuel himself sought none of their praise. He sought purpose. Having known abandonment, he dedicated his life to those who shared similar suffering. With the support of Dr. Warren and the townspeople, Samuel helped establish a sanctuary for orphaned and neglected children, a place where no child would ever face the silence he had endured. The sanctuary was built upon a simple promise: no door would ever be locked, no child would ever be forgotten. Samuel worked tirelessly, offering comfort to frightened children, teaching them trust, guiding them through fear with patience born from his own experience. He spoke gently, listened deeply, and provided the presence he had once created within his own mind. Where once he had invented companionship, he now became companionship for others. Years later, a visitor asked Samuel the question that had haunted Briar Glen since the sealed room was opened. "How did you survive alone for so long?" Samuel considered the question carefully. Then he answered with quiet certainty. "I was alone," he said. "But I decided not to leave myself." His words carried a truth deeper than explanation. Survival had not come from hidden food or supernatural protection. It had come from the simple, powerful refusal to surrender. Hope had sustained him, will had preserved him, and forgiveness had freed him. The hollow house, once a symbol of fear, was eventually dismantled. The sealed chamber beneath it was preserved not as a place of horror, but as a reminder, a testament to both the fragility and strength of the human heart. Visitors who stood within its stone walls often described an overwhelming stillness, not of dread, but of reflection. The room no longer represented imprisonment, it represented endurance. Samuel himself returned to the site only once. Standing before the chamber where he had spent his childhood, he did not tremble. He did not turn away. He simply touched the cold stone wall and whispered a quiet farewell, not to the darkness, but to the child he had once been. The boy who had feared the light had become a man who carried light within him, and in the quiet town of Briar Glen, his story lived on, not as a tale of terror, but as a testament to the unbreakable strength of the human spirit, for the sealed room had revealed more than a hidden child. It had revealed a profound truth, that even in the deepest darkness, when abandoned by the world and forgotten by all, the human heart can choose to endure. It can choose to forgive. It can choose to live. And sometimes, the greatest miracle is not rescue from the outside. It is the strength found within. Some prisons are made of walls, others are made of fear, but the human heart, when it refuses to surrender, can survive even the silence of abandonment. Because sometimes, the greatest miracle is not being saved by others, it is saving yourself.